Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because today we're diving deep into something that's been making headlines and affecting everyday lives on both sides of the border: the ongoing trade tensions between Canada and the United States. I'm talking about tariffs, alliances, beef prices skyrocketing, and how Prime Minister Mark Carney is navigating this whole mess with a strategy that's all about patience and smart moves. This isn't just dry politics, it's about how these decisions hit your wallet, your dinner table, and the bigger picture of North American relations. First off, let's set the scene. Right now, as we're speaking in late August 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney is over in Europe, shaking hands and building bridges with key allies. Why Europe? Well, Canada's kind of pivoting away from the drama brewing with our southern neighbour, the United States. Tensions have been simmering for a while now, and honestly, the relationship between the US and Canada hasn't felt this shaky in years. President Donald Trump has been wielding tariffs like his go-to tool for pressure, completely reshaping how America deals with its closest partners. Down in Washington, the vibe is all about sharp tones, surprise attacks, and tough talk to squeeze out concessions. But up here in Canada, Carney's playing a different game. Instead of firing back with the same heat, he's focusing on patience, strengthening alliances, and building that long-term leverage. The big question isn't just about today's tariffs, it's whether Canada can stand its ground and carve out a future that's not totally in America's shadow. Just yesterday, Carney announced that Canada would be dropping some of those countermeasures on American goods. Now you might be thinking, wait, is that giving in? But let's unpack this. Strategically, it's a pretty savvy move. It's all about underscoring the importance and the real value of the USMCA. That's the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, for those who might not be familiar. By scaling back on these retaliatory tariffs, Carney's basically highlighting how crucial this deal is for everyone involved. Think about it. Roughly 85 to 90% of Canadian exports to the US already zip across the border tariff-free thanks to USMCA. So by removing those countermeasures on certain goods, Canada's showing respect for the agreement and putting the ball in Washington's court to do the same. Imagine you're a Canadian family heading to the supermarket. With these changes, you might start seeing lower prices on everyday stuff like fruit juice, yogurt, or those basic food staples that were getting hit hard. And it's not just consumers. Canadian manufacturers who rely on US components for their products are breathing a sigh of relief too. On the surface, yeah, it could look like a concession, but dig a little deeper, and it's a deliberate gesture. Carney's saying, hey, we value this pact, and we're committed to it. In his own words, as he put it recently, as we work to address outstanding trade issues with the United States, it's important, it's vital, that we do everything we can to preserve this unique advantage for Canadian workers and Canadian businesses. But here's where it gets interesting. The real sticky points are still hanging out there like metals and autos. The US is slapping tariffs of up to 50% on Canadian steel, aluminum and copper, all under the banner of national security. Canada hasn't budged on retaliatory measures for those specific products. This isn't accidental. It's a calculated mix of offering some relief while holding on to resistance. It shows goodwill without throwing away leverage, and it signals that Canada's ready to sit down and negotiate seriously on the stuff that truly counts. Rather than bending under pressure, Carney's pacing these talks, making sure Canada sets the terms instead of just reacting to every wild swing from Washington. Now let's zoom out a bit. As this trade war drags on with the US, Carney's not putting all his eggs in one basket. He's been laser-focused on diversifying Canada's trade partnerships, especially ramping things up with Europe. Canada's got some ace cards here. Our energy resources and critical minerals are at the top of the pitch list. Carney's trip includes meetings with leaders in Germany, Poland and Latvia, plus chats with big business execs. The message is straightforward. Canada can be that reliable supplier Europe needs right now, especially when they're worried about shaky supply chains. This push comes at a perfect time. The European Union just wrapped up a tariff framework with the US that sets a 15% baseline on a bunch of goods, but higher duties are still biting on steel and aluminum. Canada's watching that closely and stepping in with offers on energy, minerals, and even defence cooperation. It's positioning Ottawa as an appealing alternative while Europe looks for ways to dodge US pressure. And don't forget, we've got Canadian troops in Poland and Latvia as part of Operation Reassurance. That boosts our credibility not just economically, but on the security front too. What might seem like a routine trade mission is actually a bold statement of independence. Canada's spreading its wings, diversifying options, and making it crystal clear that we won't be backed into a corner. The contrast with Washington's style couldn't be starker. Trump loves the confrontation. He uses tariffs to rattle allies, create urgency, and snag quick wins. Carney, he's crafting a slower, steadier game. Lower costs at home, keep that leverage intact, and forge partnerships abroad. It might not make for flashy headlines like Trump's antics, but it builds real resilience. For Canada, this isn't about caving to American might. It's about proving that a middle power like us, with the right resources and friends, can weather the storm and come out stronger. The next few months are going to be a real test for both leaders. Trump will keep pushing with more tariffs and tight deadlines. Carney will counter by leaning on alliances and playing those economic cards wisely. Canada's not just reacting anymore. We're standing tall, charting our own course, and reminding the world that our choices pack a punch. All right, let's shift gears a little and talk about how this all kicked into high gear recently. It sounds like the Canada-US trade talks are stuck in a holding pattern, especially after President Trump bumped up tariffs on certain Canadian goods. Some provincial premiers up here are even calling for retaliation, like pulling American alcohol off the shelves or tweaking procurement processes. We have to push back for sure, as one put it. And yeah, that makes sense when you're feeling the squeeze. At midnight on August 1st, Trump raised those tariffs on Canadian goods not covered by USMCA from 25% to 35%. It was a bold, dramatic move, aimed at punishing Canada for not signing a last-minute trade deal. Unlike South Korea or the EU, who caved under the pressure, Canada held firm, insisting on a fair agreement rather than rushing into something lopsided. These tariffs hit a small slice of total exports, but man, the symbolism is huge. It shows that even a long-time ally isn't safe from the crosshairs. It's flipped what was once one of the world's most stable trade relationships into a zone of confrontation. But Canada's response? Canada is strong. We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away. Building sustainably, building together, building positively. That's what we're going to do. And yes, we'll come to something with the Americans. That's Carney laying it out plain. No big outburst at the podium, no knee-jerk retaliatory tariffs. Instead, it's been calm, measured, and quietly resolute. Everyday Canadians are frustrated, sure, but not panicking. We've been through this rodeo before, back in Trump's first term, when bans on US products like whiskey stirred up real political waves down south. That history lingers. And today, a lot of folks up here prefer building long-term strength over endless tit-for-tat games. The public mood in Canada has evolved too. People are tired of the unpredictability, the constant power plays. Trump's style comes off more like theatre than real diplomacy, and this time, Canada's opting out of the drama. Carney didn't sign that rushed deal like others did. He made it clear we won't take a template that doesn't serve our interests. In his public statements, he hammered home themes of sustainability and self-confidence, acknowledging the messiness of negotiations without backing down. His playbook? Steer clear of a bad deal, ride out the noise, and safeguard that national leverage for the long haul. Trump probably expected us to fold. What he got was defiance, but without the spectacle. And as one commentator noted, when you blow up a relationship as important as the US-Canada one, there are consequences. Case in point, reports surfaced that Canada and Mexico are teaming up on a Northern Corridor agreement to smooth trade between us without looping in the US. Economists point out that about 95% of Canada's exports to the US are still shielded under USMCA, so only a tiny portion feels the new tariff sting. But that tiny portion matters, especially in places like Ontario, where steel and autos are big deals politically. Even former US Ambassador to Canada David Cohen chimed in, warning that these moves are chipping away at trust. For decades, the US-Canada bond was a global standout. Defense, intelligence, culture, all intertwined with trade. That trust got rebuilt during the Biden years, but now it's taking hits again. Behind closed doors, Canada and Mexico are fast-tracking that $120 billion Northern Corridor trade route, essentially prepping for a world with less US dependability. It's a subtle but powerful signal that allies are eyeing alternatives. On the US side, Trump's team is touting a 3% GDP bump in Q2 as evidence of winning. But dig into it, and economists, including those in Commerce Department briefs, say it's mostly a technical rebound from imports dropping after businesses stockpiled ahead of tariff deadlines. Back in April, Trump boasted about 200 trade deals. By August 1st, the real count was more like 8, and Canada's not on the list. His approach is all about projecting strength, but each tariff that pushes away a partner risks leaving the US more isolated from the allies it needs. Canada's not just holding the line, we're quietly stepping away from the pressure, keeping doors open elsewhere. And speaking of specific impacts, let's talk about something that's hitting dinner tables hard. Beef. We've got a 50% tariff on products from Brazil, including beef, and prices have shot to all-time highs. Nearly 90% of Americans are stressing about grocery bills now. Beef's always been that staple on the American plate. Think backyard barbecues, juicy steaks. But by summer 2025, families are staring at receipts in shock. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says ground beef hit an average of $13.49 per kilogram in June, up almost 12% from last year, the highest ever. What was $4.99 a pound a few months back is now pushing $7.99. Behind this, Trump's 50% tariff on Brazilian beef, since Brazil was the biggest foreign supplier, making up 21 to 27% of US imports. In 2024, the US pulled in 229,000 tons from Brazil, and in the first half of 2025 alone, 181,000 tons worth nearly $1 billion. With tariffs that high, imports have dried up. The big question: if Brazil shifts its beef to Canada instead, what does that do to the US market? Early 2025 saw US buyers relying on Brazil to fill gaps from domestic shortages. US herd sizes are at 1961 lows thanks to droughts and feed costs. Imports peaked at 48,000 tons in April, but by July they cratered to under 10,000 tons, an 80% drop in 3 months. As one expert said, we'll see imports from Brazil decline dramatically because of that tariff. That reduces our beef supplies, keeping prices higher. Brazil's already filed a WTO complaint, calling the tariff a rule breaker. Even without a ruling, the math is clear. The US is losing about 400,000 tons of beef yearly, 4 to 5% of consumption, worth $1 to $1.3 billion. Wholesale prices are up 21% since January per USDA, and consumer prices for cuts are 8 to 12% higher. Everyone's feeling it. Packers paying more for cattle, burger joints pondering smaller portions or price hikes. But what if Brazil redirects to Canada? The US tariffs are closing doors, so Canada's stepping up. We reopened our market in late 2024 with imports at $39 million in 2023 and up 44% in Q1 2025. Brazil's reviving Mercosur talks with us too, which could boost flows. Volumes are smaller than US needs, but Canada's using this to diversify and look reliable, while the US seems erratic. For the US, losing Brazilian beef means tighter supplies for ground beef, higher prices squeezing budgets, and billions in extra costs. Importers switch to pricier options like Australia or Argentina. Processors see slimmer margins, retailers watch sales dip, and restaurants struggle with menu adjustments. Canada, free from Trump's shadow, is bolstering trade links, pulling in new supplies, and positioning as a stable player. Trump's tariff bet might look tough in talks, but it's leaving American families with record bills, while Canada grows its beef trade role in North America. Shifting back to the bigger trade picture, we've protected the integrity of USMCA, but some say Canada's calling its future into question. US voices claim it's Canada undermining things, not the US. By mid-August 2025, talks are at a standstill. It's not just steel, aluminum, or autos. The shadow over everything is USMCA's fate. This deal protects about 85% of cross-border trade, keeping North America integrated. But now it's strained. US Ambassador Pete Huxra accused Canada of weakening USMCA with retaliatory measures. In Ottawa, it's seen as defending against a war Washington started. As one analyst put it, he was recounting an alternative history, claiming Canada attacked when Trump launched the tariff war that hit Canada first and hardest. The stakes are massive. If USMCA crumbles, it reshapes North America's economy. Trump's keeping pressure on with 35% tariffs on non-USMCA Canadian goods, up from 25%, 50% on aluminum. Washington calls it leverage. Canada calls it punishment. Carney's firm, no bad deal, even if it means waiting for the 2026 review. Quietly, we're aligning with Mexico for coordinated stances if Trump reopens early. Ontario's Doug Ford warns it could happen by year's end. The US risks too. Without USMCA, costs spike for American industries relying on Canadian energy, parts, minerals. That's why Canada bets on patience, diversify exports, hold USMCA protections. Meanwhile, tariffs trickle into US homes. 35% on Canadian aluminum means higher canned goods prices. As Trump says, they don't understand that tariffs are paid by the consumer. In places like Seoul County, Florida, shoppers see Parmesan up from $12.99 to $16.99. Coffee, sugar, Brazilian meat climbing, even champagne's pricier. A poll shows 53% stressed by groceries. Census data, imports down, making foreign goods costlier. For folks, it's real. Rethinking meals, maybe eating out more as home cooking gets too expensive. One resident said they're clearly not trying to come to a fair deal. They see tariffs as a revenue stream to tip the scales for the US. Trump's tool pressures partners, but prolonged standoffs burden Americans, potentially politically. Canada plays long, hold firm, keep alliances, preserve USMCA. It's not just one deal, it's North America's trade future. Tariffs hurt both, but who lasts longer? For now, it's a resolve test, with US voters possibly tipping the scale. So where are we at? The trade talks between Canada and the United States are still stuck in neutral, and the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, is under some serious strain. This deal is the backbone of North American trade, keeping about 85% of cross-border goods tariff-free and supply chains humming. But with President Trump ramping up tariffs on Canadian goods outside that agreement to 35% and even 50% on stuff like aluminum, the pressure's on. Washington says it's just leverage to get a better deal, but Ottawa's calling it what it is, a trade war they didn't start. And Canada's not just sitting there taking punches. Mark Carney's got a plan, and it's about staying calm, holding leverage, and looking beyond the US for opportunities. Let's talk about what's happening on the ground, because this isn't just about politicians in suits trading barbs. These tariffs are hitting real people, and the effects are showing up in places like grocery stores and factories. In the US, those 35% tariffs on Canadian aluminum are jacking up the cost of things like canned drinks and packaged goods. Down in places like Seoul County, Florida, shoppers are noticing price tags creeping up. Parmesan cheese jumping from $12.99 to $16.99, coffee and sugar getting pricier, even champagne costing a couple bucks more. A recent poll says 53% of Americans are stressing out over grocery bills, and it's not hard to see why. The US Census Bureau's reporting that imports are dropping because of these tariffs, which makes foreign goods even more expensive. For a lot of folks, this isn't some abstract policy debate. It's about staring at your grocery receipt and wondering how you're supposed to keep up. It's not just consumers feeling the pinch. Businesses are getting squeezed too. American companies that rely on Canadian auto parts, energy or minerals are facing higher costs, and that's rippling through the economy. Restaurants, especially fast food chains, are stuck deciding whether to shrink portions or hike menu prices. Meat packers are paying more for cattle, and retailers are seeing sales dip as customers pull back. Trump's team keeps framing tariffs as a way to strong-arm better deals, but as one Florida shopper put it, they're not trying for a fair deal. They see tariffs as a revenue stream to tip the scales for the US. The longer this drags on, the more it's American consumers and businesses footing the bill, and that could spell political trouble if prices keep climbing into the fall. Now, let's flip to Canada's side of the story. Up here, the mood is different. Not panicked, but definitely fed up. Canadians are tired of the unpredictability, the constant cycle of threats and counter-threats. Trump's approach feels like a reality show, all drama and spectacle, and Canada's choosing not to play that game. Instead of matching his noise, Carney's keeping things steady. He's made it clear Canada won't sign a rushed deal that doesn't serve our interests, just like he refused that last-minute agreement Trump tried to push. In public, Carney's all about projecting confidence and sustainability, saying things like, "Canada is strong. We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away." It's a message that resonates with a public that's ready to focus on long-term strength over short-term fights. One of the smartest moves Canada's making is teaming up with Mexico. There's talk of this Northern Corridor Agreement, a $120 billion trade route that would make it easier for Canada and Mexico to trade directly, bypassing the US entirely. It's not just a backup plan. It's a signal that allies are preparing for a future where the US might not be the most reliable partner. Economists point out that 95% of Canada's exports to the US are still protected under USMCA, so the new 35% tariffs only hit a small chunk. But that chunk matters, especially in provinces like Ontario, where industries like steel and autos are huge, both economically and politically. Former US Ambassador David Cohen even warned that these tariff moves are eroding the trust that made the US-Canada relationship a global model for decades. That trust, carefully rebuilt during the Biden years, is taking another hit now. While Trump's team brags about a 3% GDP bump in Q2 as proof their strategy's working, the fine print tells a different story. Economists, including ones cited in Commerce Department reports, say that growth was mostly a technical rebound. Businesses stockpiled goods before tariffs hit, so imports tanked afterward. Back in April, Trump claimed he'd sealed 200 trade deals, but by August, the real number was closer to 8, and Canada wasn't one of them. His whole approach is about looking tough, but each tariff that alienates a partner like Canada risks leaving the US more isolated. Meanwhile, Canada's quietly stepping back from the pressure, keeping its options open and building bridges elsewhere. Speaking of elsewhere, let's zoom in on Carney's European tour, because this is a big piece of the puzzle. While trade talks with the US are stalled, Canada's out there pitching itself as a reliable partner to Europe. Carney's meeting with leaders in Germany, Poland and Latvia, plus top business execs, and the pitch is clear. Canada's got energy and critical minerals that Europe desperately needs right now. With global supply chains feeling shaky, Europe's anxious about securing stable sources, and Canada's stepping up to fill that gap. This isn't just about trade. It's about positioning Canada as a counterweight to US unpredictability. The timing couldn't be better. The European Union just locked in a tariff deal with the US, setting a 15% baseline on many goods, but steel and aluminum are still getting hit with higher duties. Canada's watching that closely and jumping in with offers of energy, minerals, and even defense cooperation. Our troops in Poland and Latvia under Operation Reassurance aren't just symbolic. They boost Canada's cred as a partner on both economic and security fronts. This trip might look like a standard trade mission, but it's really a declaration of independence. Canada's saying, we're not just America's neighbor. We've got options, and we're not afraid to use them. Now let's get into one of the juiciest parts of this whole saga, beef. If you're in the US, you've probably noticed your grocery bill stinging a bit more lately, and beef's a big culprit. Prices are at record highs, with ground beef hitting $13.49 per kilogram in June 2025, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's up nearly 12% from a year ago, and it's the highest ever recorded. A pound that used to cost $4.99 is now closer to $7.99. Why? Trump slapped a 50% tariff on Brazilian beef, which used to make up 21 to 27% of US beef imports. In 2024, the US brought in 229,000 tons of Brazilian beef, And in the first half of 2025, 181,000 tons worth almost $1 billion. But with those tariffs in place, that supply's dropped to a trickle, down to under 10,000 tons by July. An 80% collapse in just 3 months. This matters because the US was leaning hard on Brazil to fill gaps in its own supply. American herd sizes are at their lowest since 1961, thanks to droughts and high feed costs. So when imports from Brazil tanked, it left a hole, about 400,000 tons of beef a year, or 4 to 5% of what the US consumes. That's worth $1 to $1.3 billion in trade value, and it's why wholesale beef prices are up 21% since January, with consumer prices for cuts climbing 8 to 12%. From meat packers to burger chains to your local grocery store, everyone's feeling the crunch. Fast food joints are even debating smaller patties or higher prices to cope. Here's where it gets wild. What if Brazil starts sending that beef to Canada instead? Canada's already opened its doors, with beef imports from Brazil hitting $39 million in 2023 and jumping 44% in the first quarter of 2025. Brazil's also dusting off Mercosur trade talks with Canada, which could mean even more beef heading north. Sure, Canada's market is smaller than the US, but we're seizing this moment to diversify and show the world we're a steady partner, while the US looks like it's playing hardball. For the US, losing that Brazilian supply means tighter stocks of ground beef for burgers, higher prices hitting wallets, and billions in extra costs across the supply chain. Importers are turning to pricier options like Australia or Argentina. Processors are seeing thinner margins, and retailers are watching sales shrink as prices climb. Canada, meanwhile, is out here making moves. We're not just dodging Trump's shadow, we're drawing new trade lines and showing global partners we can be a stable player. The World Trade Organization's already got a complaint from Brazil about the US tariff, arguing it breaks trade rules, but even without a ruling, the damage is done. Canada's stepping in as the reliable alternative, and that's a big deal for our role in North American trade. Back to the bigger trade picture, USMCA's still the elephant in the room. US Ambassador Pete Huxra's out there saying Canada's undermining the deal by pushing back with retaliatory measures, but let's be real, Canada's just defending itself in a fight Washington picked. As one analyst put it, Trump's team is spinning an alternative history where Canada's the aggressor, when really the US tariffs hit us first and hardest. If USMCA falls apart, it's not just Canada and the US, it's all of North America's economic stability on the line. American industries leaning on Canadian energy, auto parts or minerals would see costs spike without those protections. That's why Canada's betting on patience, diversifying export markets while keeping USMCA intact. Ontario Premier Doug Ford's even warned that Trump might try to reopen USMCA talks before the scheduled 2026 review, maybe as early as late 2025. Canada's not sitting idle. We're working with Mexico to align our strategies, making sure we're ready if Washington comes knocking early. This isn't just about one agreement, it's about setting the terms for how North America trades for the next decade. Tariffs are hurting everyone, no question. The real test is who can hold out longer, and Canada's playing it smart, staying firm, building alliances, and keeping our economic cards close. Let's wrap this part up with a quick look at what's at stake for everyday folks. In the US, those higher prices aren't just numbers. They're forcing people to rethink how they shop and eat. One Florida resident told reporters they might start eating out more because cooking at home's getting too pricey. That's real. In Canada, we're feeling the frustration too, but there's a sense of resolve. We've been through trade spats before, and we know how to weather them. Carney's strategy, avoid bad deals, wait out the noise, build elsewhere, is about making sure Canada comes out stronger, not just surviving, but thriving. So what's next? Will Trump double down on tariffs? Will Canada and Mexico's Northern Corridor deal change the game? And how long can American consumers handle these price hikes before it shifts the political tide? So, where are we standing in late August 2025? The trade talks between Canada and the US are still at a standstill, with the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, caught in the crosshairs. This deal keeps about 85% of trade across North America tariff-free, but President Trump's 35% tariffs on non-USMCA Canadian goods and 50% on things like aluminum and steel are putting serious pressure on it. Washington's framing these as leverage to force a better deal, but Canada sees it as a one-sided attack in a trade war they didn't start. Meanwhile, Carney's playing a long game, staying calm, holding on to leverage, and building bridges elsewhere, especially with Europe and Mexico. It's a strategy that's less about headlines and more about setting Canada up for the future. Let's start with the human side of this, because these tariffs aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're hitting wallets and dinner tables. In the US, those 35% tariffs on Canadian goods like aluminum are driving up costs for everyday items. Picture this. You're at the grocery store in a place like Seoul County, Florida, and the Parmesan cheese you used to grab for $12.99 is now $16.99. Coffee, sugar, even a bottle of champagne. Everything's creeping up. The 50% tariff on Brazilian beef, which we talked about last time, has ground beef prices at a record $13.49 per kilogram, up 12% from last year. A recent poll shows 53% of Americans are stressed out about grocery costs, and the US Census Bureau backs that up, noting imports are dropping as tariffs make foreign goods pricier. For a lot of people, this means rethinking what's on the menu or even cutting back on cooking at home because it's just too expensive. Businesses are feeling it too. American companies that depend on Canadian auto parts, energy or minerals are facing higher costs, and that's rippling through supply chains. Fast food chains are stuck between shrinking burger sizes or jacking up prices. Meat packers are paying more for cattle, and retailers are watching sales dip as customers tighten their belts. As one Florida resident put it to local reporters, they're not trying for a fair deal. They see tariffs as a way to tip the scales for the US. The longer this goes on, the more it's American consumers and businesses who are paying the price, and that could turn into political heat for Trump if prices keep climbing into the fall. Up in Canada, the vibe's different but no less intense. People are frustrated, exhausted really, by the constant back and forth of trade threats. Trump's approach feels like a high-stakes drama show, all bluster and spectacle. But Canada's not taking the bait. Carney's keeping things steady, refusing to sign a rushed deal that doesn't work for us. He's been clear in public, saying things like, "Canada is strong. We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away. We're building sustainably, building together, building positively." It's a message that hits home with Canadians who want resilience over endless trade battles. We've seen this before, like during Trump's first term when we yanked American whiskey off shelves and caused a stir down south. That memory's still fresh, and today, the public's leaning toward long-term strength over quick retaliation. One of Canada's biggest plays right now is doubling down on partnerships outside the US, and the Northern Corridor Agreement with Mexico is a prime example. This $120 billion trade route is designed to make it easier for Canada and Mexico to trade directly, sidestepping the US entirely. It's a quiet but bold move, signaling that allies are prepping for a world where the US might not be the most dependable partner. Economists note that 95% of Canada's exports to the US are still protected under USMCA, so the 35% tariffs only hit a small slice, but that slice matters. Especially in places like Ontario, where steel and auto industries are economic and political heavyweights. Former US Ambassador David Cohen warned that these tariff moves are eroding a trust that made the US-Canada relationship a global gold standard for decades. That trust, rebuilt during the Biden administration, is taking another beating now. On the US side, Trump's team is hyping a 3% GDP bump in the second quarter as proof their strategy's a winner. But economists, including those cited in Commerce Department reports, say it's mostly a technical bounce. Businesses stockpiled goods before tariffs hit, so imports crashed afterward. Trump claimed in April he'd nailed 200 trade deals, but by August, the count was closer to 8, and Canada's not on that list. His playbook is all about projecting power, but each tariff that pushes away a partner risks leaving the US more isolated. Canada's not just holding firm. We're quietly stepping back from the pressure and keeping our options wide open. Let's talk about Canada's European push again, because this is a huge part of Carney's strategy. While the US trade talks are stalled, he's over in Germany, Poland and Latvia, meeting leaders and business execs, pitching Canada as a reliable supplier of energy and critical minerals. Europe's nervous about supply chain disruptions, and Canada's stepping up with exactly what they need. The timing's perfect. The EU just signed a tariff deal with the US, setting a 15% baseline on goods, but steel and aluminum are still getting slammed with higher duties. Canada's watching that and offering energy, minerals and defence cooperation as an alternative. Our troops in Poland and Latvia under Operation Reassurance aren't just there for show. They make Canada a credible partner on both economic and security fronts. This isn't just a trade mission. It's Canada saying, we're not just America's sidekick. We've got our own game. Now let's circle back to beef, because it's a perfect example of how these tariffs are reshaping markets. The US's 50% tariff on Brazilian beef has slashed imports from 48,000 tons in April to under 10,000 tons by July, an 80% drop. Brazil used to supply 21 to 27% of US beef imports, but with American herd sizes at a 1961 low due to drought and feed costs, that loss is a big deal. It's costing the US about 400,000 tons of beef a year, or 4 to 5% of consumption, worth $1 to $1.3 billion. Wholesale prices are up 21% since January, and consumer prices for cuts are up 8 to 12%. From meat packers to restaurants to grocery stores, everyone's scrambling. Here's the kicker. Canada's stepping in where the US is stepping out. We reopened our market to Brazilian beef in late 2024, with imports already at $39 million in 2023 and up 44% in the first quarter of 2025. Brazil's also reviving Mercosur trade talks with Canada, which could mean even more beef heading our way. Our market's smaller than the US, but we're using this to diversify and show the world we're a stable partner while the US plays hardball. For the US, this means tighter supplies, higher burger prices, and billions in extra costs. Importers are turning to pricier sources like Australia or Argentina, processors are seeing slimmer margins, and retailers are losing sales as prices climb. The World Trade Organization's got a complaint from Brazil about the US tariff, saying it breaks trade rules, but the damage is already done. Canada's positioning itself as the reliable alternative, and that's shifting the balance in North American trade. It's not just about beef, it's about Canada proving it can stand tall without being under Trump's shadow. Back to USMCA, because it's the heart of this whole saga. US Ambassador Pete Huxford out there claiming Canada's undermining the deal with retaliatory measures, but Ottawa sees it as self-defense in a fight Washington started. As one analyst put it, Trump's team is pushing an alternative history where Canada's the bad guy, when really the US tariffs hit us first and hardest. If USMCA falls apart, it's not just about Canada and the US, it's about North America's economic stability. American industries relying on Canadian energy, auto parts or minerals would face skyrocketing costs without those protections. That's why Canada's betting on patience, diversifying markets while keeping USMCA intact. Ontario Premier Doug Ford's warned that Trump might push to reopen USMCA talks before the 2026 review, maybe even by late 2025. Canada's not waiting around. We're aligning with Mexico to stay ready if that happens. This isn't just about one deal. It's about shaping how North America trades for the next decade. Tariffs are hurting both sides, no doubt. The question is, who can hold out longer? And Canada's playing it smart. Staying firm, building alliances, and keeping our economic cards close. So what's the big picture here? For everyday folks, it's about higher prices at the store, tougher choices at the checkout, and a sense that things are getting harder. In the US, voters might decide when enough is enough if prices keep climbing. In Canada, it's about resolve, knowing we've weathered trade storms before and can do it again. Carney's strategy, avoid bad deals, wait out the noise, build elsewhere, is about making sure Canada doesn't just survive but comes out stronger. What's next? Will Trump double down on tariffs? Will the Northern Corridor deal with Mexico shake things up? Will Canada's European push pay off? And how long can both sides keep this up before something gives? Let me know in the comments what you think about Canada's moves, how these tariffs are hitting you, or what you want us to cover next. If you've loved this series, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. We've got plenty more breakdowns coming your way. Thanks for sticking with us, and we'll see you in the next one.